King Charles has kicked off his 4-day state visit to Kenya, and he's just been speaking at an official dinner where he's acknowledged some of the more painful aspects of British rule. Accompanied by Queen Camilla, it's the King's first state visit to a Commonwealth country as monarch, and he's been facing widespread calls to issue an apology for abuses committed during colonial rule.
There were abhorrent and unjustifiable acts of violence committed against Kenyans as they waged, as you said at the United Nations, a painful struggle for independence and sovereignty. And for that, there can be no excuse. In coming back to Kenya, it matters greatly to me that I should deepen my own understanding of these wrongs and that I meet some of those whose lives and communities were so grievously affected.
Joining me now in the studio, TalkTV's Royal Editor Sarah Hewson. Good to see you, Sarah. And down the line, I'm joined by Kehinde Andrews, Professor of Black Studies at Birmingham City University. Good afternoon to you. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's get Sarah to set the scene, and then we'll discuss the issues of apologising or acknowledging or compensating or reparations. So, Sarah, this is a big deal because it's the first.
It's the first state visit by the new king to a Commonwealth country, and Kenya was chosen to be that first country.
Yes.
It is a visit steeped in history. Of course, it was in Kenya in 1952 where the king's mother became Queen Elizabeth II, but also that painful history. And we heard there the king acknowledging those painful notes of Britain's colonial past. And it is something for which that the scars of that are laid bare during this visit in Kenya. There have been growing calls for the king to issue an apology. The Kenyan Human Rights Commission said this weekend that they wanted an unequivocal and unconditional public apology, as opposed, they said, to the very cautious, self-preserving and protective statements of regret that have been issued in the past. We didn't get an apology from the king. We weren't going to, as we heard there. But he did talk about abhorrent and unjustifiable acts, and he talked about deepening his learning and his understanding of the pain that had been caused during that period.
Let me bring Professor Andrews into this discussion. You've heard, Professor, what the king has said, and obviously there's the deafening silence of what the king has not said. What are your thoughts on the visit if he says only what he's just said?
I mean, what he just said is frankly insulting. I mean, it's not like the Mau is something where actually there's been accepted in law that it was problematic. There's been money paid out. The fact you can't even apologise for that tells us the limits of all of this. It's simply PR and not even that, trying to protect their backs against reparations claims. But frankly, unless he was going to visit the Treetop Hotel his mother found out she was queen in and renounce her throne, there really is nothing he could say. His throne, sorry, nothing he could say that would satisfy me anyway. I mean, the idea that the king in the 21st century can go to a former colony and that matters, and what he says matters, that is deeply problematic to me, I think.
Well, explain why that particular part of it is problematic. His visiting, you say, is problematic. What he says, well, I mean, whatever it is problematic. Why is that?
I mean, look, we think about these things as though they're in the past. They're not in the past. So colonialism happened, certainly. He's the head of the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is just the British Empire. He's visiting as though he is as though it is his mother visiting, right? We have this royal family that represents colonialism and that whole history and present. And the fact that him going to the country, and even if he said sorry, why should that matter? Why do we think that this is something that should be important? Again, in the 21st century, Kenya is an independent country, and Kenya should have moved on. The king of all people has no role whatsoever in any positive future for that country.
But of course, there's no compulsory membership of the Commonwealth. You don't have to be a member of the Commonwealth. Do you think that there will be no appetite at all among Kenyans, among those people living in the country, to see the king and queen? You think there'll be just utter indifference, or indeed worse, that there'll be actual hostility towards it? Or do you think there will be a proportion of the population who are really delighted and excited to see the king and queen?
Well, I think the fact that the Commonwealth is voluntary tells you just how little things have changed, right? The fact that countries still feel they need to be part of this club, which is the former British Empire, and they don't really get much out of it. Because actually the truth is the economics of colonialism haven't changed at all. And Kenya's, the poverty in Kenya is directly tied to the wealth in the UK and the wealth which the monarch goes around the world flaunting. So I think there should be hostility towards the king, but unfortunately, we kind of take these things for granted. We kind of still venerate these positions. I've said before that the British monarchy is a symbol of white supremacy. I don't know why they will be welcome. I don't know why the king will be welcome in Kenya or any progressive country for that matter.
Let's get Sarah Houston to have a bash at explaining why, because it's clear watching the footage that there is an appetite to see the king and queen, and that there are certain percentage or proportion of the population who are delighted that they're there.
Yes. Look, there were protests over the weekend in certain sectors of Kenyan society about this visit, and we talked about the calls for an apology. There are some that are very, very angry about the monarch's visit to this country without an apology. But this is also a visit where the aim is to look to the future of relations between Britain and Kenya on issues like climate change, for example, which obviously the king is a big champion of. And he's meeting a lot of young people for whom the legacy of the Mau Mau uprising and colonialism is less significant. Actually, it's about the economy and their economic situation right now. He's been visiting an urban farm, talking about organic farming, for example. I mean, there's a lot of key issues and you know, his pet projects on display there. But this is a time of reckoning, isn't it? Because we have a new monarch and there are questions being asked by Commonwealth countries. And so that's why it's really important that he does get this right. So he's got this speech out there. He hasn't gone as far as many would have liked, but he is there on behalf of the government, and it isn't government policy to apologise.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed. Professor Andrews, thank you. So kind of you to join me on the programme.